I'm joined here by three rabbis who usually spend one session at a time at camp, at SzarvasCamp, and we rarely have the opportunity to have them all together at the same place. So I guess this is a unique opportunity to ask some questions and have three of them together. The three rabbis are Seth Braunstein from all the way from New York, Rabbi Zsolt all the way from Leipzig, Germany, and Rabbi Tamás all the way from Budapest, Hungary. So we received a number of questions from our Szarvas community, and we'll try to address at least some of them, if not all of them. So the first question that I want to ask, and I'd like each one of you to answer, is to very quickly introduce yourselves. And then there were two questions which we can combine. One was, why did you decide to become a rabbi? What was your motivation behind? And how many years have you spent studying to become one, and where? And maybe also if you can include a sentence or two to what Jewish stream you belong to, if you identify with any. Zsolt, can we start with you?
Okay, that's very kind of you. Thank you so much. So my name is Zsolt Balla. I was born and raised in Budapest. And actually, if you see Tommy straight away, I have to tell you very honestly that it's partially due to him that I have become a rabbi. I have actually studied in university engineering and management, and I finished my master's, and then I wanted to take a year for Jewish studies. And through Tommy and Linda, who's Linda's father was back then the executive vice president of the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation, they suggested that maybe I should try and go to a yeshiva. Now, I don't know if you heard of a yeshiva. Yeshiva is an Orthodox Talmudic school, which I really felt that it's a little bit too much for me, but Tommy insisted that I go there for a Shabbat to Berlin in Germany. And 18 years ago, I had incredible life-changing experience of coming and spending a Shabbat. The first time in my life, I was confronted that I saw young people living Torah Jewish life, Orthodox, and this is now actually the key word, I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and still they're normal. And this was for me really a life-changing experience when I realized that actually Torah values, classical Orthodox Torah values could not be more relevant than they are today, in today's day and age. So I have learned for 8 years in a Talmudic school, and I have received my rabbinical ordination in 2009. And ever since, I've been actually serving the Jewish community here in Leipzig, Germany. And why I did become an Orthodox rabbi is simply because I had no other choice. What do I mean by that? It's a call of responsibility. If you realize that there are so many people who you actually owe to, and I don't mean financially or so, but about your environment, of what you received as a young person in a camp from people, and you want to give it back, and you owe to the people who you meet along the way, then it was, so to say, a logical choice. I actually never intended to become a rabbi, and but I never resisted to go with the flow whenever something seemed to be a logical decision. I never intended to be a pulpit rabbi. In the beginning, I always wanted to be only involved in Jewish education. And at some point, again, going with the flow, I have came with my wife. I actually, very interestingly, I'm married into my community here in Germany. And I have become a rabbi. So now just a very few words, just two more words about what does it mean to be an Orthodox rabbi. You probably also, those people who are looking at us right now, they might be expecting an Orthodox rabbi to wear constantly a hat, having the locks, having the long hair on the side. So Orthodox Judaism is very, very, it's a very bright spectrum. And I don't even like defining myself, not like in modern Orthodox or anything, just simply go with the term Orthodox, meaning I try to adhere to the halachic guidelines as it's detailed in the Talmud and later in halachic literature. And this is how I try to define who I am. So I don't like actually any kind of limiting expressions. If somebody would ask me if I could define it, I would say I'm contemporary Orthodox. I want to be an Orthodox guy in today's day and age without compromising on any of the religious values, but at the same time to be able to live these values in today's day and age.
Thank you. Seth, would you go next?
Sure. First of all, I think this is such a great opportunity to be able to be here together with you, Mina, and Zsolt, and with Tomi, to be able to be in conversation. I think, as you said, like, we don't often get to really have this opportunity in camp. So I'm really, really grateful to be able to have this opportunity and to be able to connect with all these great people who I really like and respect, and feel very closely connected to through all these years in Szarvas. I guess I'll start with the question in terms of why I became a rabbi. I think that I always grew up in a pretty rich Jewish kind of an environment, in a way that Judaism was always joyful, enjoyable, embraced. It was always something that I really just enjoyed, actually, as a young child, and I continued to grow. And as I continued to get older, of course, I started to ask questions, as we all do. But for me, Judaism has always had its real root in that joy and enjoyment and connection to the ritual, to the practice, to the in and out of the yearly cycle, of the daily cycle, of the weekly cycle, and just kind of really feeling closely connected to it. I'm a person who's always enjoyed connecting to people. And the other piece is a real close connection to Jewish text, to Jewish study. And I think really putting all those three pieces of the puzzle together, I'd say, is kind of really how I ended up becoming a rabbi. It kind of just happened. I don't think it was like one particular moment in my life that said, oh, I should become a rabbi. I've like always been interested in Jewish education, camp work, informal education, connecting with people, creating moments for people that are hopefully quite meaningful to them. And all that kind of came together, and I decided to go to rabbinical school. The rabbinical school that I attended is called Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, which is in New York. They've actually changed over the years from being modern Orthodox, open Orthodox. I think they've been fluid in those terms. I think it's actually interesting that Zsolt said that he's just Orthodox. I actually really like I like that. Like, I'm just Orthodox. But the particular institution that I attended, I think it's interesting to just kind of share a little bit about its philosophy in terms of like who I am and where I'm at. I would describe it as open Orthodox in reality. It's an Orthodox rabbinical school, and its training, in its rigidness in terms of Jewish text, Jewish law, Jewish study, all the stuff that gets done and studied if you go to a rabbinical school. And I would say at the same time, it also has its eye on the modern world. What are issues in the modern world? What are important questions to ask about how we embrace and connect with the modern world? How do we struggle with those questions? Was always on the table throughout our study. I went to rabbinical school for 4 years, and I've been a rabbi since 2005. And I've been involved in camp in Szarvas since also around 2005. So I think that covers everything, Mina.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Seth.
Sure.
Our third Rabbi Tommy is having some issues with the internet. So until he rejoins us again, hopefully very, very soon, I want to ask you a next question, which I think is very relevant for the current situation we're all living in right now. And there was a question that came in asking how, according to you and your opinion, how did this whole COVID situation change Jewish communities, or how do you think it might change it in the future? Zsolti?
I want to give now Seth the opportunity to answer first, maybe. I think.
Okay, Seth.
Sure. I think it's a great question, and it's really, I think, something that people are struggling with, especially when you're in it. Like, I think we're still really deeply in this crisis, challenge, whatever kind of language we want to use. I think there's been, tremendous creativity within this crisis. I mean, tremendous kol kavod to Zsolt, who has taken the idea of tefillah, of a prayer 3 times a day in the public space, in the synagogue, in the Beit Knesset, and brought it out to the larger world. I've really enjoyed being part of that at times. I think it's really interesting, in the moment, to keep people really connected and rooted, which has been a hard thing for people. I think the question that's being asked here is more, how will it change in the future? I think it's really hard to tell. I think that this will absolutely impact particular organizations in terms of their ability to continue to survive, perhaps financially after this. But I think, in reality, there's been some tremendous creativity that's happened. And I think there have been people who've really connected to Jewish life, Jewish experience, Jewish expression through the internet in a way that they haven't even thought is possible before. And so I wonder is that as we, hopefully sooner than later transition out of this, I'm really wondering, as much as all of us are in some way, to be honest, sick of using this and Zoom, and it's really hard because we really just want to be with people, is how this tool can be utilized in a positive way. I think it's, I'm not sure. Beyond that, I also think it's a big question about how long and sustained it continues. I think that is a big question. I think that if it continues over the course of another 6 months, year, I think it's going to be a lot different than if it ends over the course of the next few months in, with some kind of a miracle. I think, I also hope that, the appreciation and value of person-to-person connection might change. How are we, are we still going to be close to people physically? How do we want to be close to people physically? I think people's comfortability or uncomfortability with that, how we come out of this, I think is going to be a really, really big question. I'm curious to hear what Zsolt has to say, and we could see how the conversation goes from here. Or Tommy, hopefully, if he comes back.
Just want to say, first of all, I failed to acknowledge in the very beginning when I said about my incredible gratitude to all of you, and Mina and Ilya from organizing behind the scenes of this conversation. And I think I'll repeat myself about how thankful I am a little bit later. But I just want to say, I think this whole situation is a gift. It's an incredible opportunity for us to rethink what is important for us, and especially whether we really live up to what we used to say what is important for us. I want to give you an example. I feel like many of my ideas until now have been challenged. I give you one example for that. Is I always believed in communal prayer. That was something that was very much on my heart from an early age. One of the things that I never found in my youth and my hometown back then, a communal prayer where you go into synagogue and you are part of actually how you're praying with everybody. and you sing together. So I always put a lot of emphasis on that. And now suddenly I find myself in a situation where the government regulation says singing is dangerous. You cannot do that in the synagogue, which is fascinating. So I have to rethink, is this really the value that was important for me? For me, being in a communal space to pray together with 10 people all the time, I was very careful with that in the previous years, always trying to find the opportunity to do that. And I cannot do that now. So, but I don't see it as a depressing thing. It just forces you to really think what was important for you until now, how you're going to go out of this, how you're going to put yourself into this new reality, because I really believe that this is going to change not just the here and now, but also will have a very long-lasting future effect on how we all relate to religious Jewish life. So, but again, how it's going to go down, we have no idea. I seriously believe that. At the beginning, I was thinking to myself that a lot of bubbles will pop out. What I mean is that there are a lot of little startup or ideas like, this is what is important for me, but in this environment, it cannot survive. At the same time, right now, a few months later, I'm not sure, because for all programs and all startup things, there's an incredible, it's like a life instinct. We want to stay alive, so they do everything in their power to stay alive. So there are a lot of challenges with the community. Obviously, you come mostly from a perspective of youth camp. I also have to care for the elderly in my community who do not have internet access, or do have internet access, but they just simply cannot go with that full. For them, it's not possible to join in. How do we deal with them? How do we keep them in the loop? How do we deal with groups who are right now in a risk? Financially, health-wise, how do you do with families who are at risk? What I mean is that this to be closed in at home, it's a hotbed for things that you might not like to speak in a summer camp, but I think it's part of our educations that our education that we have to give to our campers as well, that they should be aware if somebody's hurt in their environment. This is unfortunately could be a hotbed for families who children who are endangered, family members who are endangered because of any kind of aggression. So these are very, very tough questions, and we do not have the answers. And it's very, very hard to focus on all these groups and to make sure that they will stay safe. And we have to pray as well a lot that we make the right decisions in these times. We have to do all our best to keep in touch with our people, but at the same time, in a social media platform, you have two opportunities. You could be a promoter, or you could say self-promoter, or you could be a connector. And we see now a blow up in people who are just trying to self-promote, but we have to mainly focus on the connect, how we connect the people to us without self-promoting. It should not be me in the focus. It should be the other people in the focus. A lot of challenging questions, but I really think it's just a great opportunity for us to really rethink and reboot our society. And it's really dependent on us whether we'll succeed or not.
This was a very nicely said, Zsolt, and I also had a lot of thinking of kind of what is actually important now that we found ourselves in this very different situation. Thank you both very much. Unfortunately, Tommy still hasn't been able to rejoin us, but we're remaining hopeful. So I want to move on to a different type of question now. We very often hear the phrase that Jews are the chosen people. And there are people who understand this phrase and this concept in a very positive way, and then there are people who understand this concept in a very negative way. And when I say people, I mean both Jews and non-Jews. So I'd like for two of you, from your different perspectives, to maybe tell us, how do you understand this term and what does it mean for you? Seth?
Sure. I would say I've probably changed my understanding of this term over the course of time. But what I often think about when it comes to this question about the chosen people, I think there are two questions. One is the internal perspective and one is the external perspective. How do we as the Jewish people see ourselves? And also, how do other people see us? And I think the impact of the answer of this question can really have, that different kinds of an effect to us as Jews and to how people perceive us when they hear the term the chosen people. I like to really think of the term Kedoshim Tihiyu, which like to be a holy nation. That I see the term chosenness as really as chosen to be in partnership with God to create and bring holiness into this world, right? The word kadosh means holiness. And we also have a term in Or Lagoyim to be a light onto the nations. And I believe that the idea and the concept is that we as the Jewish people are chosen as to be people as partners together with God, to bring healing, to bring goodness, to bring creativity, to bring connectedness, to bring meaning, to bring holiness into this world. And I think that God has chosen us to be on that path together. I don't believe it's to the exclusion of other people, but I do believe that the Jewish people are chosen as a people to be actively engaged in this way, in partnership together with God. I mean, I see that as the role of the human being in general in the world, as being created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elokim, is that we in this world should like always ask ourselves in the morning when we get up, throughout the day, are we bring light into this world? Are we doing things that are positive? And I think as Jews, we are particularly tasked with this, I would call it an opportunity, to be in partnership, and to really try to bring goodness to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can only add to it that this is also pretty much the way I see it. It means responsibility. We are responsible to be ethical and moral role models for the world. And as simple as that. This is not, it's definitely a unique thing, just like when you choose a person for a leadership role in any company or any organization. It's not a privilege. It's something that is that obligates you to become somebody who can relate to the rest of the world. I think it's also very important that we have to be in touch with the rest of the world. At the same time, somehow you have to be disconnected, because the word kadosh also means that you have to separate, but not in the sense of removing yourself, but in order that you understand what are the things that you are not like to represent in this world, and you have to bring good and morals into this world. This is the simple meaning. At the same time, towards the rest of the world, I'm going to quote now something that might sound a little bit harsh, but if we Jews do not do Kiddush, then the rest of the world does the Havdalah. If we do not do our role to really become Kedoshim and to become this role model that we want to, that it results that the rest of the world would like to see us removed. And it's a very challenging thing, because very often in this craziness we do, especially again now we also see with it, by the way, back to the corona, it's also we see a rise in anti-Semitism, and we do not understand how this mechanism works. We I think rabbis and people who are religious, we do believe that there's some divine logic behind, but how exactly works, we human beings, we are not able to understand. But the way out of it is that we have to do our best to show compassion, to show love, to show moral role model, to be moral role models for the world.
Thank you both so much. The next question is also a question that I myself have been struggling at times, and it's about the belief, the concept that Torah has been given at Sinai. So what is your opinion about that? Is that something that you believe? And what is the advice or that you would possibly give to somebody who is struggling with this question and maybe it's not something that they believe in? Zsolti?
So I think, and I hope Seth agrees with me in this, that's also one of the things that defines us as Orthodox people. If you say you're Orthodox, you have to believe in a certain theology. There are principles of faith in Judaism that you have to embrace, because if you remove that, you are not anymore within the framework. So one of these principles that one is obligated to believe is that Torah is from Sinai. Now, it's very important to emphasize that we do not say that Torah is from God. We say Torah is from Sinai. Why do we say it's from Sinai? If you think about, just to compare ourselves to different monotheistic religions, all the religions start with one human person who has a certain revelation, and then he goes around. But this is not the way that we Judaism work. The way we work is that there was a revelation of a whole people standing in front of Sinai. Now that's what we mean Torah is from Sinai. We believe that there's an uninterrupted chain of this tradition that has the chain has obviously gone through sometimes harder times and different types of persecution, but we believe that it's not from one person and one person's mind who made it up, but it's a national event that happened at Mount Sinai and Shavuot. So it is a crucial thing to believe that this is part of this is our tradition, and we do believe that it is divine. At least I do, and I think this is also part of it. What defines you as an Orthodox rabbi. Now, I do understand people who are struggling with the idea, but if you think about it, it's very important. If you believe that there is a higher purpose in the world, then you have to also believe that this higher purpose would give you guidelines how you would have to deal with. And these guidelines should be given not just through a revelation of one person who has a dream or a vision, but it's rather should be given in a form that people will accept it. And this is what we believe that happened by Mount Sinai. So whether I do believe that it is divine, I do believe that it has been given to us as well, as the Torah and the Talmudic literature testifies that we have to we have not just the right but the obligation to utilize this knowledge each generation. And sometimes you can have one thing and sometimes you can have the opposite, but it's important that you go according to the guidelines also, which guidelines have been given you by at Sinai. The information and how to utilize that information has become our part of who we are as Jews by Mount Sinai. And this is why we refer to it as Torah mi Sinai and not Torah mi Hashem, not Torah from God, but Torah is from Sinai, where we had the chance to receive that. And this is what we carry on. So I personally do believe in this concept. And but this is, I think, also itself, this question begs for much longer hours of discussion and a lot of sources to be seen and to go into details. This is how quick I could wrap it up.
Thank you, Zsolt. Seth?
Yeah. First of all, I gave a class right before Shavuot for Szarvas. If anyone can click back to it, and I think you'll see all different kinds of interesting texts and ideas, around the actual experience of the Sinai experience. So if you're interested in thinking about this idea more or this question more. It does not talk about the question if, but it talks about the actual experience, and to try to really look and analyze what was that experience, what was the impact, what was the value of that experience. I really actually would like to try to focus on a different piece of this to kind of add to what Zsolt was talking about, which I think is something that people struggle with. I personally do believe that, Torah Misinai, if I have absolutely in my life had moments of questioning, of wondering, of asking that question, and for various different kinds of reasons, coming back to, yes, feeling that that is true. But I could certainly understand, and that's kind of what I would kind of perhaps spend just a few moments talking about here, is this idea of like being asked to believe this, or to believe something in Judaism. Zsolt talked about it a little bit, right? We have these, really, really important ideas and beliefs of particular things in Judaism. But I think as people, as human beings, psychologically, it's hard to be asked or to be told to believe something. And I think often the question that I've often heard in camp or other places is, what do I do if I just I don't believe it? Like, it's actually just like, I can't control how I feel or how I believe. Like, I'd like to intellectually or emotionally believe it, but I don't know. And what I'd like to really talk about here a little bit is, I think that that's okay. In other words, as human beings, like, we all struggle with things, and we all ask questions. And I think part of the beauty of the Jewish experience, I think it was so beautifully said that, it's not Torah mi Hashem, it's Torah mi Sinai, and that it's about a history, it's about a story, it's about text, it's about experience, it's about passing something down from one generation to the next, even if it was perhaps lost a little bit in a particular generation. We have the opportunity to be able to actually reclaim it and to be able to actually connect to it. For me, I think that if we're asking those questions, there's no reason for someone to check out because of that. In fact, you're actually quite checked in if you're asking the questions. I'm happy. Zsolt, I know, Mina, Tome, I know, is having a hard time, I'm sure, connects all the time with people on this as well. Like, I'm happy to continue this conversation and to talk about it. But what I think I just really would like to add here is that struggle and that questioning, is real. I think as Jews, we are people, yes, of belief, but we are also people who ask really important questions. And I think often in camp, in the Beit Knesset, in different kinds of things, I often want people to leave asking questions as opposed to always having all the answers, because we don't always have all the answers. And as I said, I've struggled with this and other questions in my life, and tried to come up with some answer. But often I find through the question comes the deeper meaning and the deeper actual connection and experience to trying to understand it a little bit better. And I think for me, the idea of Torah Misinai, oral law, Talmudic law, studying that, being engaged in a conversation that took place, a long time ago, brings real deep meaning to me. Even if I'm not sure if everything happened, being connected to those stories, to that narrative, to that law, to those experiences, and being able to actually engage with it is what brings that deep level of meaning. To not just be told A, B, or C, but to actually be in it, and to be questioning it.
I think that's beautifully said, and I think that's one of the many things I love about Judaism, is that it encourages you constantly to ask questions, and I love that we have this opportunity to ask the questions. Tommy is unfortunately still not being able to rejoin. He has some issues with his internet connections, it seems like. But we're continuing the conversation with Seth and Zsolt, and we're going to move on to a very practical question now that came in. And the question is, if a person is a vegan, is this person automatically keeping kashrut? Zsolt?
The answer is unfortunately no, but it's quite close. So if somebody is vegan, then they're, this is what I love about it. Especially people who have been brought up in a little bit more traditional area, environment, houses, like, Rabbi, you can eat it, this is kosher. I said, please, I understand, I respect you fully, I don't mind, but please understand, I spent 2 years, just 2 years out of 8 of my studies, just to be able to tell what is kosher and what is not. It's not about you, it's much more complex. So there are some issues. Judaism puts a lot of emphasis on cleaning vegetables, on making sure that you do not have any kind of infestation of insects. There's a lot of emphasis also on external of the kashrut, of the kosher status of wine derivatives, which a lot of additives nowadays have. So there's a lot of issue with that. There's also then a lot of rabbinical prohibitions, which today don't seem to be politically correct. One of them is that means certain dishes must be prepared with an active participation of a Jewish person. Even if it's vegan, but the Jewish person has not taken part in that process, the food will be disqualified. So there are a lot of tiny details. Also, I think it's important to know that sometimes the vegan certification is also not as easy as it sounds. Often something that has a certification doesn't mean that this is everything that it contains. Unfortunately, there are also a lot of other small things. But I have to say that in many areas, the vegan certification is really a good way to begin. So it is true that I would say even, let's go 90%. If somebody keeps vegan, then it's almost 90% there. And if he's able to take a look at the rest, or to make sure that the food doesn't contain the vine derivatives. The restaurants might be a little bit more problematic, but the vegan certified products to buy, I cannot tell you yes straight away, because I would have to know which it is. In the last few years, especially for the German Jewish community, I had the privilege to be involved in preparing a kosher list from Germany, which has a lot of vegan products, a lot of on the list that I don't say we are certifying that, but we also did our research to make sure that these products do not contain anything that they are not supposed to. So it's not automatically kosher, but it's very close to there. So if somebody goes to I have to be honest with you, in the recent last 3 years, I also eliminate a lot of animal products in my own diet. I'm not vegan. I'm also not vegetarian, but I think it's also very healthy thing to be balanced. And I'm definitely not against vegan diet for people who would like to pursue. And it's really pretty much, though, if somebody wants to be kosher, keep kosher, vegan is definitely a good beginning.
Okay, thank you, Zsolt. Seth, I have a different question for you now. It's kind of...
That's good, because he got the full piece there. There's not much to add, so it's all there.
Since we're on the topic of eating or not eating, this is more in the direction of not eating, but we're now in the period of 3 weeks coming up to the Tisha B'Av, which is a day when Jewish people fast and they don't eat. So could you tell us a little bit about, from your own perspective, what is actually the point of fasting? We don't have a lot of fasting days in Jewish calendars, but there is a number of them, and maybe it's also a kind of a relevant question now that we're close to Tisha B'Av.
Great. And it'll be strange to not actually have Tisha B'Av actually in camp this summer. I think it's a great question about, like, I think more broadly about having a concept of a fast day. I'll kind of step back a little bit on this question, and then I'll try to come in a little bit to Tisha B'Av and the particular period of time that we're now in the Jewish calendar. Most of the days over the course of the year that we as Jews fast usually commemorate a particular moment in Jewish history. Almost all of them connect to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the breaching of the walls, different like kinds of particular moments that like connect to that history. There are also others. Of course, we all know about Yom Kippur, which is different. It is somewhat historical, but is quite a different kind of nature of a fast day. It's really a lot more about, and perhaps we could have another talk closer to Yom Kippur about this, but it's really a lot more about Shuvah, and actually taking a step back and really trying to stop and really think about who we are as people, who we are as human beings, clean up a little bit from the, from the previous year, and really try to sort of think towards the next year. But in terms of the idea in general of fasting, there's actually a beautiful text that I really like, which comes from the book of Yeshayahu, from Isaiah, chapter 58. You could take a look. It's verses 3 to 7. And it's a beautiful and really, really powerful text there. And actually, in that context, God turns to the people and says, like, how are you fasting? Why are you fasting? Right? Is this the particular fast I desire? What I desire is really like to unlock the fetters of wickedness, to be doing, good things, justice in the world. And so I think that the whole point of this text is that if we're just going to fast for the sake of fasting, and that is in and of itself a value and part of Jewish tradition and Jewish law to fast, but I think that in the end of the day, if it's not impacting us on some way, why are we fasting? What is the point of the fast? The point of the fast is to impact us as people, as human beings. When you stop eating, you start to really think about things that are a lot more basic in our lives. What makes us live, how we breathe, that like how dependent we are on drinking and eating in our lives. And how can we, because of this, be people who can do better in this world. And that it's a great, great text. I encourage everyone to take a look at it on your own. Again, it's chapter 58, verses 3 to 7. I'll just quickly hone in on the particular time period that we're in now. It's called the 3 weeks. Bein HaMitzarim, right now. Just the other day, we had what's called the fast day of Shiva Sarva Tammuz, which is the 17th day of the Hebrew month, or the Jewish month, I actually like to call it. I don't know why it's Hebrew. I think it's more the Jewish month of Tammuz, which really talks about and commemorates the breaching of the walls in Jerusalem, which really leads up into the 3 weeks of Tisha B'Av, of the 9th day of the month of Av, which was the actual destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. And I think, and this often happens in camp, people have a hard time connecting back to that moment. Like, it's so long ago. How do you connect to that? And there are plenty of other times and moments of challenge, of destruction in Jewish history as well, that we also think about and commemorate both on Shivas Arba Tammuz and also on Tisha B'Av. But I think what's really important here, and what also impacts me, is that why was how come it was actually destroyed? And there is an idea is that we as people were unable to really respect one another. And I think that if we can really be asking ourselves important questions around this time of year, yes, it is particularly a time of mourning. I choose to not shave. I choose to step back from particular things in the 3 weeks of this time in the summer. But at the end of the day, why are we fasting on all the fast? What's the point of fasting? Is that, yes, it is about stepping back and not eating or drinking, but really it's about how is it impacting us as people, and how are we turning that day into action, if you will.
Thank you so much. Zsolt, is there anything you would like to add to this?
I actually, I don't want to add anything to it. No. I just want to tell you, I love halakha. For me, learning halakha is one of the most beautiful things in Judaism, to understand what you do and why you do. And in the chapter in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is a small abbreviated compendium of Jewish law, and it's a code, Jewish code from the 19th century, made in Hungary, in Ungvar, in Uzhgorod, today's written by Rabbi Shlomo Ganzfried. So when he phrases in the very first halakha, when he speaks about the laws of the public fast days, just very quickly, he says it's a positive commandment from the prophets to fast on days, but the fast is not the point. The fast is a vehicle how you can actually reach tshuva, and he brings a quote from the prophet Yonah, the book of Yonah, where he says that when the people of Nineveh were fasting, God saw their deeds, and that's why he turned back on his original idea. And then people say, God did not see their fast, God saw their deeds. What was that deed? Is the repentance of coming back to God, coming back to Hashem. But they used the vehicle, used the tool, which is the fasting. So the fasting is not the point. The fasting is the tool, and you should never mix up the tool and the goal. So you just have and the job. You have a job to do, and here's a wonderful vehicle and wonderful tool to do that. Do not mess it up. So this is just what I want to add, but it's just a little bit paraphrasing of what Seth said. But I just wanted to add that this is not just a nice idea what Seth said. This is codified as a Jewish law in a halachic compendiums.
Nice.
I would just sort of add a small thing if I can, Mina, which is that I actually think, as you know, I think like as Zsolt said, studying Jewish law, and I think like, what is the point of it? And like, I don't know if we're going to get to that question on this one, or perhaps we'll be able to, you know, could be able to have another conversation. But yes, it's about the action, but it's about like, how does that action impact us as people? And like, what, you know, like, why are we doing Shabbat? Why are we doing these things? How does it transform us as human beings in particular ways? And I think like that's what halakha is. I mean, the word halakha is a road, a direction, and we could tease this out for a long time here, if we would choose. But it's about being on a journey, being on a road that provides meaning to all different kinds of moments throughout our life. So I just wanted to add that in to what Zsolt was talking about, which is great.
Thank you. We have some 10-ish more minutes, and I'd like to encourage people watching us on Facebook. If you have any questions, please do send them, and we'll try to answer them. And while hopefully waiting for one or two more questions, there is another question that came in, which I think is also very relevant for today. And it's a question that asks, what is the position of Judaism regarding the same-sex marriage? Zsolt, would you like to
This is a very tough and complex topic. Even if the answer is relatively short, but the whole concept behind it is quite. It needs definitely a little bit more of of going deep into the sources. But just very, very quickly, I represent Orthodox Judaism. I'm an Orthodox rabbi. It's within Orthodox Judaism, the same-sex marriage is something that is a red flag. It's not done. But at the same time, I would like to say that I believe, at least Orthodox Judaism doesn't condemn sexuality. It's just there's only one thing that is within homosexuality forbidden according to Torah law, is this is the actual homosexual act, but not the feelings. According to the Jewish text, there's no such thing as sexuality. Very interesting. There's never ever sexual orientation is defined. Whatever is defined is how it is his physically implements or manifests. Sorry. So this the Midrash gives a source where it says that the generation of Noah, when the flood came, actually there was a shift in that generation. And previously, when people had the same-sex relationship, they never desired to have it sanctified with a contract, with a ketubah. And but there, in the 10th generation in the world, there was a shift when it was not just enough, okay, we live together with that this exists, and people, again, just as in Judaism, there are a lot of people who do not keep Shabbat. I don't want to relativize these things, but this is the way we look at it. Is a certain act permissible or not according to Torah law? But this doesn't mean any sort of a judgment. I firmly believe that from the Jewish perspective. But the idea of sanctifying this with the contract, this is according to Jewish law, according to normative Orthodox Jewish law. This is something that is not acceptable.
Thank you. It is a very hard question, I think, especially nowadays. Seth, is there anything you want to add to this?
I mean, I think that was, really, really well articulated. I really agree with Zsolt on pretty much everything he said. And I think the only piece that I think I would just kind of add on top of that is, I think, so what do we do with that? And what do we, as rabbis, as people, as human beings who are living, in 2020, 2021, with an eye on the world around us, with an eye on real people. How do we choose to react to things like this, and how do we handle it? I think actually is a really, really important question. There was actually a really interesting article I read. Zsolt briefly mentioned there are people who don't keep Shabbat and kashrut, and we bring all of those people into our community fully, have aliyot, different kinds of things that we do. And it was actually a really interesting article that I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested, which is actually just thinking about the idea, of metaphor when it comes to the topic of homosexuality, and actually how it's quite dangerous to enter into that, because it actually in some way can really take away or minimize from a person who's gay and their particular feeling. And I'm not going to get completely into that article here, but I'm happy to share it with anybody who's interested in reading it afterwards. You could feel free to reach out to me. I think that, particularly where it leaves us is, and I'm talking, completely, this is me here, is I think that we really need to 100% fully embrace people who are LGBTQ into our communities, fully into our communities. If they have a family, if they have children in schools, in synagogues, I believe should also have, membership in synagogues, all of these things, and should be a full part of the community. And like I know myself, I have often used that analogy. We bring people fully in who don't keep Shabbat 100% or kosher 100%, or even who cheat on business. Do we check everyone's, taxes and everything? We don't know how everyone practices in their own way. And so I don't mean to use this to actually minimize it, but I'm using it because like the idea, and I think I'm going to go back to, I think, a piece that I opened with, which is people who are asked to be holy people, Kedoshim Tihiyu. And we all understand why this topic is harder than other topics. It's how we live our life. And, you know, you could argue that it's public, it's private, you know, but it's out there. We are who we are as people. And, you know, the question of gender also, which was not really the question here, is a really, really important question, I think, to really be asking now, that I've been asking a little bit recently. And that's, I think, just the piece I wanted to really add here. And I think also to be really aware about nuance and how we're entering into this conversation. To be able to actually continue the conversation, not to close the conversation, I think is extremely important. And, you know, I think I'm happy to be able to continue this conversation with people. And I think it comes up in almost every Golan Hermon group who comes into the Beit Knesset. And I've had some incredible, really powerful conversations with people throughout my time in camp. And I think it's really real. And like, I believe that if you're gay, like that's who you are and that's how you were created. And how do we work with that? I think it's a real question, and then I'm really open to continuing.
Can I add one thing, or actually two things? One of them is that I think it's also important to know how different Jewish communities are built up in the world. Like where Seth is, it's how it's very often Jewish religious groups can have the so to say privilege to define what are the so to say the guidelines who they accept as member of the communities. For example, a Jewish community could say, I only accept in my community who keep Shabbat. I'm feeling so blessed in Germany that this is not the case. Rather, you're Jewish, you have the right to be a member of the Jewish community. There's no other question. Number one. Number two, once we had a wonderful American fellow coming into the synagogue and Friday night and I said, would you like to join us for a Kiddush? He said, sure, I would love to join with you Kiddush. And since most of my community are German and Russian speakers, so I told him, sit next to me at the table. That means it's not a problem thing. He's sitting next to the rabbi. And we started to speak to each other. He says, Rabbi, it was a wonderful, beautiful evening and very much fun as usual, you know, with good food. And he asked, Rabbi, do you know anything? You have to know I'm an LGBTQ person, and I would like to ask, you know, do you do anything to accommodate? It's like, I tell you what, do I accommodate? I'm not asking questions. You are a Jewish person coming into my synagogue. You sit next to me. I embrace you. You are my friend. I don't care what you do. This is not an issue. You are always welcome in our community, and nobody could say a word to you. You should always come whenever you're here. That's not. My way of accommodating is not putting any of these questions on the table, and I don't think it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be everywhere like this. This is the way I personally feel about this.
I would actually just add one thing quickly, Mina, which I think is good to put out there because we don't know actually who's out there, if anyone, who's watching us. And I'm happy to add a link afterwards in the chat, or again, if you prefer to reach out to me about this privately. But there are two, there are probably even more, but there are two great resources. There's an organization called JQY, Jewish Queer Youth. And there is another called ESHEL, ESHEL. They're both organizations that do define themselves as Orthodox and really actually out there to really work with Jews who identify as LGBTQ and to feel connected to a larger community of people. And there's some incredible work that they do. And so if you're looking for any resources out there, I encourage you to look into either of these organizations.
Thank you, Seth, for this pieces of information. And I think that the example and the story that Zsolt just gave a minute ago was actually a really nice way for us to conclude. I think this was a very difficult question, and that's why I kind of left it for the end. But at the same time, I think it's a very nice idea and concept, given that including people and making sure that everybody finds their place and feels comfortable. And I think that's definitely the atmosphere that we are at least trying to always have at Szarvas. I would like to thank you both, Zsolti and Seth, for making the time and joining us tonight. I'm incredibly sorry that Tommy had issues with internet connection. I think this only means that we have to repeat this when his internet gets better and do this again, and get to all the other questions that we received. So thank you again very much for joining me tonight. I hope it was useful, interesting, fascinating, educational for all the people who are watching. And I would like to use this last moment to promote something that we call Szarvas Spirit Days, which is starting this Wednesday. You can check our Facebook and Instagram for more details, but we are bringing Szarvas Spirit straight to your homes via online channels. And we're hoping that you're gonna join us, all of you. Campers, former, current, future, parents, just join us for some Szarvas Spirit and Szarvas atmosphere. Thank you all very, very much, and good night.